Okay, hi everyone. We should be on air. Thank you for holding with us. We just have a delay because we're sorting out Anna's microphone. But welcome to the DWF panel on chronic illnesses. I'd like to start by acknowledging the first Australians as the traditional custodians of the continent, whose cultures are amongst the oldest living cultures in human history. I pay respect to the elders of the community and extend my recognition to their descendants who are present. Hi Anna, do we have you?
Oh, does that work?
Yeah, it's working.
Sorry about that.
No worries. I was just about to introduce everyone, but I'm going to give you that honour.
Oh, thank you. Yes, sorry everyone. I had a bit of a technical problem, so now I've got like 3 Macs sitting on my lap. But yes, so thank you so much for hanging in there and doing that, Katarina. So today we are talking about chronic illness and online communities. And so our guest today, we have Michelle Roger. And she's an Australian writer, blogger, speaker. She lives and writes about a complex chronic illness called dysautonomia and her life as a disabled woman. Her work has appeared in Kill Your Darlings, Victorian Writer, Ramp Up, and online for Writers Victoria, and multiple online support for groups and organisations. And then we have Katarina, Katarina Bryant, who is a writer and editor based in Adelaide. Her work has appeared or is forthcoming in the Griffith Review, Going Down Swinging, and on the Meandering blog, amongst others. And her essay, A Pig in Mud, was shortlisted for the 2016 Script Non-Fiction Prize for Young Writers. And I'm Anna Barnes. I'm a playwright and a writer from Melbourne. I mostly write, I write all different types of stuff, but non-fiction. I have a book published called Girl, the Ultimate Guide to Being You, which is a non-fiction book for teenage girls. And I mostly write plays and monologues, and they've been performed around Australia. And I also have dysautonomia, like yourself. So really slowed down my writing by the way. Yeah, so that's us. And sorry about the delay, but I hope everyone is watching online. And I'd like to give special shout out to all the chronically ill people who are joining us today, because that's what this is all about, community. And I'm super excited to be involved in like this event that is all about kind of creating accessible spaces for communities for chronically ill people. So whether you're a Spoonie or a Deborah or however you identify, welcome, and please join in. We will be doing, if you tweet with the hashtag DWF16, I will be checking our Twitter mentions throughout, and then we can answer all the questions you have. So please send any questions through. We'd love to have a whole community involved. My face is really white. I'm sorry about that. I'm looking right into the Melbourne sun, so I'm looking like I've got a filter on my screen. All right, so, all right, to stop me from like reading out from the website, I just want to start by saying, for the unacquainted, does anyone want to give a definition of chronic illness, or basically explain what your connection is with chronic illness and online community?
Yeah, sure.
Why not?
For me, chronic illness is essentially, I mean, if you go by the technical thing of I think it's symptoms have to last past 6 months or something equivalent to that. For me, it's been over 10 years now. I think the biggest difference for me of what chronic illness is as opposed to acute illness is that we never really get over it. So it's not like the traditional format of illness where you get sick or injured, go to hospital, take some drugs, get a cast, 6 weeks later you're back to life. For us, it's finding life within that constant illness scenario. So you might be up and down over time, and that's really common with dysautonomia, but it's also, there's a constant level of feeling like death and that sort of varies, or it does for me anyway. So either you feel really bad or you feel extremely bad. So, and it's finding a way to live with that, for me, is what the chronic illness aspect is. And I've completely forgotten the other half of your question.
And what's your engagement online with online community?
Yes. Well, I've been blogging for 7 years now. Heavily involved in the dysautonomia community from back in its infancy, where there was like maybe 1 or 2 support groups and 1 or 2 blogs and 3 people in a support group. I'm also on Instagram and Twitter and things like that. So I've been, fairly heavily involved in that community, and then expanded out into the wider chronic illness community and disability community as my health has deteriorated and I've become more disabled. So that's sort of where I sit in the whole thing.
Yeah. And I can say that I found your blog when I first was getting diagnosed, and my mum also found it and sent it to everyone. And it was super, super helpful to kind of bring me into that community. So you've very much been a big part of my getting to know the online communities. So Katerina, and Katerina, do you have online communities that you engage with, and what's your connection with chronic illness?
Yeah, so my connection with chronic illness is I live with generalized anxiety, and I have done, or at least been diagnosed as such for the past 5 years. And, very much like Michelle was saying, living with a chronic illness is something that's never going away. And I often experience very bad and not so bad. So it fluctuates too for me. And my connection with online spaces is definitely from posting my own writing in online spaces, but I think the biggest part online spaces have taken place for me is when you have anxiety, you don't always want to talk about it, although that can be very valuable. But I feel like sometimes you can talk their ear off, and going online and being able to see things that other people are experiencing that are the same, confirming, yes, this isn't me, this is the anxiety. And it can reaffirm that you're normal, if that makes sense. So that's, and all online spaces really, but Twitter's a big one as well, and Facebook community groups, and just reading other people's blogs.
Yeah, so seeing your experience kind of reflected back through other people's writing online. Yeah. Do you write, sorry, do you write about your chronic illness? Sorry, do you write about your chronic illness online, or?
Yeah, I don't have my own blog or website, but I do write for journals and write about my chronic illness online. So I've written for Scum, I think at the beginning of this year, I wrote about how I have experienced memory loss through my anxiety, so coming to terms with that and those kinds of things. I have written about it in various ways, and for Going Down Swinging, I wrote about medication and anxiety. And I think the most rewarding part of that is seeing my writing doing what other people's writing has done for me. So when people recognize themselves in my writing, that's just the best feeling, to be able to show someone else that what they're experiencing is normal, or at least we can connect through that, through a digital space, which is really special.
Yeah, I think that article that you just referred to, which I think whenever we talk about things, because I'll be talking about, especially, well, you guys' writing, remember to tweet the link afterwards, because there's some beautiful pieces of writing that you guys have both done. And the one that you're talking about that you did around like before medication, after medication, and I found that really interesting, because you have a discussion around, when do I talk about my illness, and when do I not talk about my illness, and when is withholding kind of lying?
Yeah, especially memory.
Yeah,
like it's such a huge part of your life, and you don't want to always mention it because it's not always relevant, but it is, it does affect your life and how you go through the world. So you don't want to be disingenuous with your readers either. So it's a fine line to walk.
Yeah. And that kind of thing I find in my own writing, when I tend to find myself writing it out, so writing my illness, it's either, I can't seem to find a good balance of, I either write completely about my illness or I just don't mention it if I'm writing something memoir-y, because it seems like it's such a big thing in the way that I experience it. I don't know how, and I've only been diagnosed maybe I've been sick for about 3 years, so maybe that's what comes. But I think I find that an interesting thing that I wrote recently, a kind of a play which is very memoir-based, like it's about my life, but I haven't mentioned my illness at all. And mainly because it's just so confusing, it would just almost make the play lose focus. So I guess that kind of comes up with memoir in relation to when you have to mention it. And I guess like when you can, it's a privilege to be able to not mention it. It's a privilege that I can remove that and still have an element that I can talk about. But I guess I find that a really interesting thing of when you feel like you're lying when you don't mention it. So, Michelle, you write obviously a lot about your illness. Do you ever kind of, do you feel like sometimes you're like, I'm not going to share that, or you're very kind of, you're very honest and very funny with a lot of your content. Is there a line to you where you say, this is what I'm not going to touch on, or?
I guess I'm quite open because I'm very much of the mindset that if you don't speak about things, particularly unpalatable things, I mean, for me, it affects your digestion, and, there are things that go along with that which aren't very pleasant. But if you don't speak about it and no one else speaks about it, then it's very easy to feel alone and to feel shame and you're the only one. And I know, like, before I got sick, I was a psychologist. And so part of working with patients was working through what the illness means for them and what's not shameful, and it's just a fact of life and all of that kind of stuff. So I guess about my own experiences, I've been quite open. The only thing I don't really discuss too much is personal relationships, which are heavily affected by illness, particularly chronic illness. But I've got kids, I've got a husband, I've got family, and for me, I feel like I can tell my story, but they have a right to either share or not share their story relating to my illness, if that makes sense. And I think the privacy, also with doctors and hospitals, I've interacted with so many of them over the past 10 years, but I don't tend to name them, because if you say you really hate a doctor, that could be someone else really likes, and can be really helpful for them, and that's a whole other minefield. So I don't actually feel the need to include those factors when I write as well. I think I talk a lot more about living with illness, regardless of whether it's dysautonomia or something else. And I think that aspect of the lived experience is what people connect to as well. And I think it doesn't really seem to matter a lot of times what people are ill with. There's so much in common regarding, if you're living long-term illness, it affects your relationships, your finances, your sense of self, all of those kind of things. And I think that's a universal thing we need to discuss more of. So I've sort of, over the last 10 years, I think I've swung more that way as far as discussing illness. So, and I don't know whether it's just I'm so used to being ill now that I don't need to discuss nitty-gritty as much.
But I think that there's something in that in relation to kind of, I mean, not to be very kind of political about it, but, we are, when you collectivise and you realise that your experience is not personal and that it's potentially systematic, and that, these things aren't, your fault. For example, I mean, a massive issue I know within dysautonomia community, and I would be really interested to, you know, Katarina, about your experience, but is, you know, doctors, like, before, it's kind of like with a lot of people's experience of chronic illness, like pre-diagnosis. So, you know, the search for the diagnosis, and for a lot of people, it's kind of, you know, they go to a number of doctors, myself included, and they're told that it's all in their head, or, you know, they're just anxious, or just a tall thing. Like, I got told so many things about why I had nothing to worry about, which I always found quite interesting, especially since I also have experienced kind of mental illness. And I thought it was so interesting that if someone turns up to an ER and they say, oh no, it's just anxiety, and send you away. And it's like, if I'm having anxiety so bad that I'm fainting, surely I need to be like referred to a doctor or something. But they're like, oh no, just get out of here. So I think that that's one thing that I found really, really helpful for me as someone experiencing illness, is being able, and I actually don't write a lot about it myself, but I found reading a lot of people's experiences, and as you say, it's not particularly to dysautonomia at all. You know, experience of that symptom made me realise that it wasn't me, and that it wasn't that I, you know, it wasn't my fault that I didn't get diagnosed. It wasn't because I wasn't sick enough or whatever, you know, whatever it is. It's because the system, we have a, you know, a medical system that's set up for acute illness, and often doesn't understand kind of chronic illness or autoimmune.
I think there's a trivialisation of women's symptoms as well. I think that comes across really clearly, like having been around in the community for quite a long time, the idea that the hysterical female and, you know, everything is poured into that, no matter how you present, really. And I experienced that myself. And it's that twofold thing of not only dismissing someone who may have a treatable physiological condition, you know, so for example, I've got a pacemaker now, so it wasn't exactly in my head, as one particular doctor did say. But it trivialises anxiety and depression, which is serious illness. And it's like, you know, having those two aspects in both, like for me, I saw this doctor and he told me I had working women's syndrome, I was depressed and anxious, and then he sent me out the door. And it's like, so depressed and anxious, but you're not going to help me treat that, and you've just blown off my other symptoms. And it's like, you know, and it's, you hear people are being told they should get pregnant, they just need a boyfriend. Oh, when the kids go to school, it'll be better. It goes on. It goes on and on. The trivialisation of a lot of people's symptoms, not just women, but women seem to get those more gender-specific things coming up. And I think that is a huge part of needing to hear, as you say, that people experience that, and it's not just you, and it's a systemic thing. There's a power in that, a power in the sharing, and a power in the group knowledge to change the medical system.
I agree, and I think that movement is kind of happening in an interesting way. I think that the online spaces and the communities, and especially like a massive movement within like mental health activism and chronic illness activism, I think is kind of getting there a bit. And I think the internet is really connecting us and making us realise that it's not us, and it's not an individual issue. But I find it interesting how I mean, it's an interesting space because how tired you are when you really want to advocate. Like when I got sick, I have been in kind of in activism, in feminism and different stuff. And so my original reaction was like, what is this? Like, we should be like marching. And then I was like, oh God, I'm so tired, I can't move. And I think it's a really interesting kind of activism that comes around from this community when we really are, I guess, energy poor, but time rich. And the ability to kind of have communities reflect your experience back is sometimes all you need to make a pretty shitty day a bit better.
Definitely.
So with the diagnosis, is that something that, Katerina, you experienced? Was there kind of a struggle to get diagnosis, or was that, because you said earlier that you had kind of experienced these before, but you hadn't necessarily kind of connected it or whatever?
I don't think there was a struggle so much with diagnosis, but then once you have the diagnosis, it's more like, what next?
Yeah.
Like, is the thing. Being that next step to medication is something I think doctors either are very hesitant to do or are very willing to do. And that's difficult as well. It's not so much the diagnosis and that side of the medical profession that I've found difficulty with, but more the support. So if I need a certificate or an extension for an assignment or something like that, they will be like, well, you should be coping better. And that's not really a helpful piece of advice when somebody has no circumstances. And I guess the idea of like coping, what is that, and what is doing well and what's doing poor, you can't really say for a specific individual. That's kind of where I've been struggled with the medical profession, but
yeah,
I've had overall positive experiences, but mostly because I try not to engage with it, which I'm not sure is the most helpful advice for people out there, but I found that the medical community is so triggering for me and my anxiety that I need to step away from my own mental health, if that even makes sense.
Yeah, no, it makes complete sense. And I think when I describe myself sometimes as a professional patient, because I'm just like, I have like it took me maybe a year and a half of being sick because I'm not a very organized person, and it took me a while to get my shit together. And so I have like my folders now. So then every time I see a new doctor and they're like, oh, we want to check for MS or, whatever, like, because that's how my presentation kind of reads to lots of doctors, I can be like, no, here's the test that shows that. And so I've come a lot better at it now. And so I have my little folders and I go to work, which is, I think that's quite surprising element of being sick, is just how much work it is. Just the admin is insane. I don't know what I was going to say then. That was all I was saying. I think I read this thing that said that something like 62% of Australians in 2015 identified as having a chronic illness, which I was really surprised about until I started thinking about it, and it kind of made more sense. Do you find that surprising, that figure of 62 Australians?
No, not really. I don't think. There's been a lot of stuff out, particularly the states that are very organised, where they've been saying like 1 in 2 people live with chronic illness. That's their statistic over there. So that's sort of been around. But if you think about, I guess there's different types of chronic illness. There's chronic illness like, say, heart disease or things like that. And then there are other chronic illnesses that perhaps have more impact on life and are more disrupting and things like that. So it'd be nice to see a breakdown, I think, of what are manageable, I guess, levels of chronic illness, and when does it become that level where it's impacting on your work life and your social life and your family life and all of that. Because as you say, it becomes a real job. So yes, it'd be lovely to get back to work, but I'm working 24/7 on just, getting up in the morning, basically, and organising your doctors and all those kind of things. And I think there's sort of very different levels of severity of symptoms, access to doctors, access to medication, even just access to information in general to know you can go to the next doctor and ask a question. So you go now and, you can get your blood pressure done and you can get your cholesterol tested and things like that. But if it comes to something like dysautonomia, which is a bit sort of left of centre, there's no easy path to diagnosis for the majority of people, even to this day. So it's about, I think, 6 years is the average length from symptom to diagnosis. And that's only for one of the most well-known subtypes, which I don't happen to have.
Oh, don't you? Oh, I've got NCS.
Well, I had that originally, and then it's sort of changed over time and morphed. So yeah.
Yeah, I found I think that's what I found really helpful with the online communities was kind of seeing the differences in people's experiences. And I don't know if this might just be my personality type, but I think it was a good way to kind of, I mean, I'd been sick for a year and we didn't know why, and I was feeling pretty sorry for myself. I was having a pretty bad time. And then getting on and just realizing that there's all these people who were like, not just like sick like me, but like a lot sicker than me. I found that amazingly helpful to kind of get myself out of that hole of feeling sorry for myself. I was like, oh shit. And they've got a baby, and they were just like people facing these kind of things. And the fact that I was seeing them do it and get through it, I found I feel like before I had my diagnosis and found like the online support group, and after, it's like black and white for me. It was just so helpful. Because you can't always explain things. And even if it's just something like, your side effects from a medication, or just how you're feeling, or how your workplace, if you're lucky enough to keep, be working. And I mean, there's just so many things that you can really only do with people who are going through a similar thing, whether it be, the same condition, or, for me, I think my connections within my existing friendship group pre-sickness have all been friends who are chronically ill with mental illness, and we have very similar experiences in kind of issues of access and issues of security, financial security, and
Yeah, I totally agree, Anna. Like, I think not only is the kind of online community for the ill great in making you feel more normalized and having people to talk to, but such an inspiration for me to kind of literally get out of bed in the morning to see all these amazing things people are doing, and amazing things people are doing to kind of pave the way to society, in more understanding of illness and what that entails and its forms.
And so I feel like I would love to know what you guys are reading, or, what kind of, are there any blogs, or I'll start because I asked the question. But I really am loving some podcasts at the moment. I think that's because for me, reading can give me migraines a bit. So I try and steer away from that when I'm sick. And I've been listening to Fully Sick, which, Michelle, you are on this week, and it's amazing. Oh my God. And it's so awesome to be able to just send that off to friends and be like, this is what I've got. But I'm loving her podcast. I just think it's a really great kind of way of viewing chronic illness of all different forms. So Fully Sick, and then In Sickness and Health, which is an American podcast, which is a bit more kind of profesh, but I don't mean that in a derogatory way to Fully Sick, because I think I prefer Fully Sick. But yeah, they're my two favorite kind of illness things at the moment. What about you guys? What are you looking at or reading or anything?
I love, speaking of podcasts, Just a Spoonful podcast by Caitlin Ply. It's an Australian podcast kind of about creatives talking about living with chronic illness.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, it's a life-changing podcast. I love it so much. And I also love this book called, it's a graphic novel. It's called Marbles by Ellen Forney. And it's about a young comic trying to kind of work through her bipolar disorder and working out kind of how much mental illness affects creativity and how sometimes we can overly, our mental illness is our creativity, and those things, standalone things, and we can be creative without being well, and we can be creative when we're well. So that was a really great.
Yeah, it sounds awesome.
Visually as well, it was really, I would recommend everyone to go check that out.
Awesome. What about you, Michelle?
Yeah, I think even before I was on Fully Sick, I think I really liked the format. Jenny's really easy to talk to. You say things you don't think you would normally share. But it's also nice to have an Australian perspective.
Yeah.
I find so much of the media around illness is from overseas, and it's just a population thing. We're just a small country, but to have those Australian stories, and it's such a variety of people. Again, a lot of them are in creative fields. So many different illnesses, and again, it's just that reassurance that here locally there are other people experiencing the same thing, and they're getting on with life, and they're having a bit of a laugh even when it's tough, and that whole being able to live with illness.
Yeah.
So I've been really loving that. I'm a slow reader these days, just cognitively I'm so bad. But probably the standout book that I've read lately would have to be Fiona Wright, The Small Acts of Disappearance.
Oh, yeah.
One of the best descriptions of chronic illness is an eating disorder for her, but the way she goes about it, I just really love it, really connected with the whole thing, and would highly recommend, regardless of what your particular flavour of illness is, I would highly recommend it. And the other one is I really love, I have to check the title because I forget all the time, Madness by Kate Richards. And again, the way she describes the mania and the psychosis and things like that is just phenomenal, absolutely phenomenal. And you sort of get caught up in it yourself. It's so, I guess it's accessible more so than a lot of books relating to illness are about overcoming and all this kind of stuff. But these are all people who are continuing to live with these illnesses and finding their way through it up and down, and all the mistakes you make along the way. And I really love that kind of format.
It's funny the disruption that chronic illness creates for that narrative of, which is a very stereotypical story narrative of you're sick and then you fight and then you survive, and it's something that I think is really pervasive in our moment in the way that we talk about all illness. I had a dad that passed of cancer last year, and we were always so shocked at the kind of discussion in relation to survivor, you're going to fight and beat cancer, and this idea that that there is, well, number one, this idea that he could beat a terminal cancer is, you beat a cancer that isn't terminal. It's kind of as uninspirational as that is. But I think that in this day and age where we are looking at things from this real pointy end of survivor culture, I think it's an interesting disruption to that narrative to have something that is going to stick around and doesn't necessarily have an ending, and definitely isn't going to be, I always think about it from obviously as a, writer and writing kind of, I've always often written stuff about myself, but as a memoir, when does it end? There is no kind of, where's the end point for this? It's not really giving us anything. So I guess maybe that's why the internet as well works so well, more than say published books that really have that definitive ending, because you can update blogs and you can update podcasts and you can update Twitter or whatever to show that kind of remitting, relapsing, or however your story is unfolding.
I think it's a palatable amount of information as well. So many people with chronic illness, and you guys will know as well, about brain fog, and I do have cognitive issues which are getting worse over time. To have to sit down and read a book is quite challenging, whereas I can read 600 words of a blog relatively easy most of the time. And it's those snippets that you can take at your own pace. They're nice little discrete bits, and you don't necessarily need to read the same blog every single week. You can sort of come in at any time and you've got a little unit of information you can read, whereas a book, you're trying to remember what happened at the start and going through, and for me that's just so difficult these days that, you know, I lose track basically.
And I think that
no, I was just going to say sometimes too, you don't want to read a book length about chronic illness because you're living chronic illness and you have enough of it kind of in your day. So to get a short, palatable kind of taste, and then to, I don't know, read a book about something that's so far from your life is really helpful as well.
Yeah, I agree. And I think the familiarity or the kind of the tone is what I really like. Like I found before I got sick, I never watched YouTube, like YouTubers. I just watched YouTube like a kind of a normal adult, I guess. It's like going to certain videos. And then one of the things when I got sick was I started watching these YouTubers, which is generally kind of the domain of 12-year-olds. But these people who just get up and tell their life, you know, and I just became so obsessed with them, and I'd see friends so rarely, and when I would, I'd be like, oh my God, have you seen this YouTuber? And they're like, who are you? Like, are you my like 10-year-old daughter? But I started thinking about that, and I would think that the familiarity and the kind of tone, and similar with blogs, really suited my life where I wasn't seeing people. And I was really alone, and it felt like, and I feel like that with a lot of the blogs that I do visit quite regularly, is I know them. Like I know your dog Freya, you know, like I know random things about people, you know, that make me feel like I kind of know people. And that sounds really kind of sad when you say it out loud, but it's nice when you're living, you know, when you might be in bed for a couple of weeks and you don't see anyone but your partner or your doctor, you know. There's something about those short snippets and the familiarity. I can't say that word very well, but the familiarity and the kind of that nature of it is, I think, what's so powerful in some ways, because we are all kind of separate geographically. You know, we're all in our own little beds or couches or rooms, and being able to kind of have an insight to someone else's daily life rather than you know, some beautifully well-written, worded kind of essay on the kind of is more what I want or need at that time, I think.
And I think it's at those times you want those raw expressions, because that anything else feels fake. I guess. And there's some beautiful writing out there about illness and chronic illness and all that. It's beautiful, beautiful writing, but I think for me personally, that often feels like it's written for an experiencing, whereas when you're actually in the moment, in the thick of it, everyone else is having these little snippets, as you say, and it also lets you into life when you can't actually participate in life yourself. And I think that raw, whether it's raw emotion or raw writing, and you know, people who just pour their heart out on a page, which might be an absolute mess, but it's so what everyone else is feeling but doesn't really want to say out loud. And I think that
to say, I think you know, I think that that's a super powerful thing that bloggers do. That, I mean, I'm a writer and I write a lot about my life, but I find it really difficult writing about my experience of illness. And I think that the idea that yeah, I just think that I think illness blogging is so difficult and incredible. And it might not be given that credit because it's memoir and it's often female. But from coming from someone who studied literature and all that jazz, I guess coming from the academy, I think that the writing is unbelievably powerful and, good, or however, and how we want to identify, these terms. But
I also find that the great thing about kind of the internet and reading about chronic illnesses online is that there's that real sense of kind of humor as well as frustration there, that sometimes when you're reading kind of more literary works, it's more of like a slow, sad burn, but it can be just so funny. And that's why I love to listen to podcasts too, because it's people laughing about, the things that happen because of their anxiety, or funny stories that we don't always hear in other forums.
Yeah. And especially not from doctors. I think, as you kind of said earlier, Michelle, you were saying the lived experience of chronic illness kind of is what is written about. And I think that that's kind of, and also when you said Katarina, it's like, oh yeah, I got diagnosed, and then what? And I think that that's then what is community, online community, that's the then what. Because it's, you go in with your specialists or whatever your kind of is, and you see them for such a short period of time, and they always focus on kind of something that might not be as big a deal to you as it is to them or whatever. And being able to then, have someone be able to joke about an enema or joke about whatever, is actually what you want to talk about is, so special. Now I'm just looking for questions on Twitter because I am having my computer has completely shut down that was on my lap. So I'm just going to look on my phone. Do you guys have any other questions?
Something I did want to kind of bring up, I guess, about anxiety in particular is the kind of, and I'd love to hear your thoughts too on general kind of misrepresentations of your illness, maybe by society. I often find that people think with anxiety that it's one thing, it's just anxious thoughts, and that's so people kind of assume, why can't you just get over that? And I kind of wanted to reinforce that it's a very physical illness as well, even though it's called mental illness. There are very physical symptoms.
Yeah.
And I think that's something important to keep in mind when talking to people with mental health problems. And when you're writing about mental health problems, if you're a fiction writer and you're writing those kinds of symptoms in mind. So have there been any misrepresentations?
What I was going to say is interesting is what I find the biggest misrepresentation or, I don't know, misunderstanding that I encounter, and I imagine maybe similar with this, which is people, for example, fatigue. If people who are healthy experience something and then they kind of think that that's what it is, so they're like, oh, I've been anxious, I've had to give a speech, I know what anxiety is, and then they're kind of putting that on. And I find that with fatigue is the worst symptom in the world, because everyone, the amount of times I've been told oh, you don't even have any idea what it's like to be tired, wait till you have a baby. And it's like, it's different. Yeah. I've done all-nighters. That's what I kind of always feel like saying. It's like, I've done all-nighters when I was young. I know what it's like to be normal, healthy, tired. This is unhealthy, tired. And I wonder whether there's a similar kind of thing with mental illness, where someone will be like, well, I've been sad. I know what depression is. I've been anxious.
Or when people say I have major anxiety over, and then insert mundane task, it's like, you're stressed, and you have to be kind of careful about that terminology because it is
Yeah.
damaging. Makes people who do experience anxiety or depression, if they're not normal and their illness isn't authentic or valid. So
Yeah.
I definitely.
Yeah, this is what happens when your condition becomes mainstreamed, I guess. It's like people, I heard someone told me this story about someone using the term spoonie. Spoons? Does everyone know spoon theory? Katarina, does that make sense? No. Okay, so it's like it's a way to explain fatigue to like people. So it's written by a woman who has lupus, and so she explains it like you have 10 spoons, and to get through the day, I choose, like, say it takes 3 spoons to have a shower, and it takes 2 spoons. So you're kind of trading off how much energy you have, because we don't have unlimited amount of spoons like, a healthy person. Anyway, so it's a way of describing it. And someone told me, I think it was on a podcast, about them explaining spoon theory to a healthy friend, and then that healthy friend saying, them having, like ages later, having an argument with the healthy friend, and the healthy friend saying, oh, I don't, this is a spoon heavy argument. I don't have the spoons for this argument. I'm like, using it. I was like, what?
Yeah.
You can't use our spoons. But I guess that's going to happen. The more awareness comes around, I'm sure we will be having people saying, oh, I'm having major spoon drainage right now.
Last year, someone actually wrote an article, someone in Australia wrote an article about spoons, but they did it with their workday. And there was a whole outcry about it at the time. And it was like, your workday is not my day with illness. Like, come on. As you're saying, fatigue levels of illness, whatever it is, whether it's from physiological or the medication or whatever it is nothing like day-to-day working exhaustion. And you cannot take spoons to that situation, because you're totally negating what we're experiencing. And it's like, I mean, even things like OCD, everyone goes, oh, I'm OCD. And it's like, no, you're not. You're really not. And you see it in sitcoms, you see it in movies, you see it is so shorthand that it sort of negates true experiences of what people are going through. And I think the only way really to fight back against that sort of mainstream media representation of all our illnesses, podcasting and blogging and vlogging and all that kind of stuff, where we can actually share our voice of what we experience. Breaking through the wall to the mass media is the next step. They're not always welcoming of that.
But letting us tell our own stories rather than have them told to us. By a healthy person who, I can't even. That story's made me so annoyed. Sorry, I feel like I'm yelling. All right, I wonder whether it's going to go off at some point. They might let us run late because my computer broke. But I have some things on the Twitters, and this is a really interesting one. Eliza Berlage, I hope I'm saying your name right, has tweeted, I often get worried about posting about my anxiety on social media because my family tells me it could affect how employees see me. And I think that's a really, really interesting issue. It's one that I've definitely dealt with. Is that something that you think about, Katarina, with your writing about illness? Or
Every time I post something, I think about it. It's this idea of, I don't know, almost being caught. Like, if somebody can see the mental health problems, then they will make you. And even, going on a panel like this, you have to think about, okay, I'm wearing a big badge that says anxiety, and that's a really big thing to come to terms with, especially I kind of, arts industry is very accepting of all different abilities.
Yeah.
And that's how I've kind of worked through those negative thoughts. But it is something I do think about a lot. And if I was perhaps in another industry, that like I do, and even when I decided to write that essay for Going Down Swinging About, was like acknowledging I'm not just anxious, I'm so anxious I need medication. And that was a really big step for me. And, you know, that being on the internet, there's a lot of my family that doesn't know about that about me. If they do Google me, they might find that. And that's something to keep in mind and weigh up. And I've kind of decided that it's worth having it out there. And if they read it and want to have a conversation with me about it, will be a really valuable interaction.
Yeah.
But, yeah. So it's something I do worry about a lot. But I figure if I keep talking about it, then more people will keep talking about it, and then it might not be that could be detrimental to my life and my career.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely, because I do have remeeting relapsing presentations, so I'm very, very, very lucky with that, and touch wood and all that jazz. But yeah, so I definitely worry about appearing, or even, and maybe that's why I find it hard to write about illness. But yeah, I've definitely had jobs. Well, I lost jobs obviously because of my illness, but then potential jobs kind of disappear because people think, oh, you know, she's sick, she's not going to be able to do it. And there's an element of truth to that, but it's not I can't do it. It's just that it's going to take a longer period of time, and you know, there'll be some, but I definitely have wondered about some opportunities that have kind of disappeared after maybe I've talked about it with people. And I think that it is still something that I find it very easy to talk about illness in sick spaces, and I think I find it more difficult to talk about it in healthy spaces, because also when you're readmitting relapsing, I mean, people will see me down the street, you know, and I'm healthy right now, and you know, he'll be like, I thought you were sick. And so, you know, so I don't know, it's a confusing kind of message to relay. So yeah, I definitely struggle with it, and I don't talk about it all that much outside of spaces that I feel like are chronically ill spaces. And also I feel like I don't want to complain. You know, I think healthy people have a certain level of capacity to hear someone talk about the same thing. And they're like, oh, that again.
Yeah.
So, I don't know, yeah. I think it's definitely something that I keep in mind. But that's also something that, all right, sorry, I'm looking at the Twitters. I love how I'm not very good at doing two things at once. I've got a lot of people saying how your blog, Michelle, was how they found, like when they found your blog, that really helped them and connected them with community. So that's really lovely. And just lots of people agreeing with the feeling of when healthy people talk about fatigue or anxiety, it's definitely, look, it's definitely a thing. I think it's gonna only get worse with the more that our conversations are happening in the mainstream. But as you said, Michelle, I think if we try and take hold of that narrative and own it, and also be aware, and I think this is something you brought up, Michelle, and I wanted to bring up earlier, but also aware of whose voices are being heard even in our own community. And do you want to speak a bit about that? Because that was a really interesting comment.
I guess it's not just within our narrow, like, dysautonomia community, but across the board. No. There's very much certain voices are heard, other voices aren't. People who are very forceful, I guess, will quite often get their opinion across, whether it's on a forum or whether it's just in the community in general in one of the organisations or anything like that. But there's a lot of people who don't have, say, educational levels. You know, they haven't gone to university. They may not have even finished high school. So their grammar and spelling and the like isn't fantastic. There might be people whose English second language, just a whole host of reasons why people might not be able to write the best.
Yeah.
I'm speaking really poorly at the moment, but sorry. I did see, and I think I sent to you guys, there was a blog post that I read where people were complaining about this person's grammar and like really slagging them off basically. And the person had cognitive issues, and simply writing that piece is such a powerful thing for them individually. But these other people couldn't see any value in what this person had written about their experience because of spelling mistakes and the like. And it was like taking that whole, you know, they talk about grammar Nazi thing, and that, but taking that to a whole new level where the person's voice was just wiped away.
Yeah.
And I guess for me, the concern is that people who don't present in the traditional literary manner, or who may not be able to express themselves particularly well, their stories are being lost, their experiences being lost. Whether it's awareness for a disorder, if all the awareness is only created by one very specific set of people, where do the other people who don't fit in that get their voices heard? So there's quite often a very narrow view of what an illness looks like, what the people who deal with it look like, how they experience life. And then there's all these other people floating around who aren't getting heard. And it could be, you know, people don't have, say, digital connections in remote Australia. You know, it's so much harder to get anywhere where you're going to get an internet where you can then start a blog or a vlog or whatever it is. So how do we encourage those voices to be heard more widely? You know, how do we support them and nurture them so that they can share their story? And we get I guess, instead of having such a narrow view of what the illness community can be, is having those diverse stories and the richness of those.
Yeah.
And that comes down to everyone should be able to see someone or find a piece of writing that connects to them and reflects their experience. And I don't think we've been very good at doing that presently. So.
Yeah. And I think that it in many ways, is bad for illnesses as well. You know, I think I know that with particularly, I mean, this example, but chronic fatigue or myalgia, how do you say it? ME.
Oh.
No, ME. Anyway, chronic fatigue. You know, that often gets that gets such a bad rap for ridiculous reasons that I would love to see a panel just about people who are experiencing that, because that's a whole new level of kind of barriers that they're facing with the medical community. But, you know, I think that they often get described as like middle-class white women, and, you know, that narrative is played out. And partly, you know, I mean, the idea that they're the only ones suffering it is completely obviously false, but they're the voices that are being heard. And whether that's, you know, because of like patriarchal structures around, you know, like, you know, men not wanting to, you know, identify with that illness, or like, I mean, there's just I'm sure there's so much, I actually don't know all of the things, but, you know, being able to be in a position where you can see a number of specialists that will identify, you know, a difficult condition already makes you, you know, privileged. You often need to go and see specialists outside of the public health system. So there's so much kind of barriers that exist to have a real true view of like who is actually experiencing the illness, that in many ways it can work against people who are experiencing it, because people then can kind of pigeonhole it as something that it's not, which, you know.
Yeah. Well, there's there's an excellent hashtag on Twitter. I think it's disability so white.
Oh, yes, I've seen this. Yeah.
And the whole idea that so much of the chronic illness community is white. And it's, you know, it's predominant in all forms of media anyway. But again, whether it's disability or illness, the majority of speakers are white, middle class, a lot of women. As you say, you know, men aren't as great as expressing themselves, except in certain disorders that are, like prostate cancer or something like that.
Coronary disorders.
Yeah. But, I mean, things like, even if you think of breast cancer, there are men who get breast cancer, but where is their voice?
Yeah.
You know, with the autonomia community, it's like a 5-to-1 ratio of women to men. Where are the male voices?
Yeah.
Things like that. I mean, they're just simple examples, but again, we're not seeing a true representation of our communities.
Yeah.
At all. You know, oh, sorry.
No, that's okay. I was just going to say, I definitely think when you think of anxiety as well, not only there are dominant narratives around that, but it's often unacknowledged that people who are the least privileged to the world is the least safe. Their anxiety is going to be so much worse. So a woman of colour walking down the street, or transgender women, would experience this so much more because the incidence of violence is so much higher for them, that this can really affect their chronic illness and how that interplays. And I think we're hearing that.
Yeah, so the kind of compounding issues, that it's not just side by side, it's actually really going to be affecting. And I think access to
society in a vacuum kind of thing.
Yeah.
Like, there are reasons to feel anxious in spaces, and if you're already experiencing, that's going to exacerbate that and make it recovery way more difficult for certain people.
Oh, that's so interesting. What a good discussion to end on. I think we've gone over. I'm so sorry to everyone that my computer broke and it was a late start. Yeah, well, thank you guys so much for taking part, and really, you've really been very generous with your stories and given me so much to think about and so much to go and Google. So please tweet all the things that you guys mentioned, because I will be trying to remember it later. Yeah, and to everyone else, thank you, Digital Writers Festival. I really hope that we can kind of continue, you know, and especially in this conversation we've just had, it would be really great to kind of have some diverse, you know, some conversations next year with some diversity around chronic illness. And yeah, we'll continue to keep this conversation going. Yeah, all right. I think, is it just going to end? Or I'll get my kit. This is my kit.
Oh. That's very fluffy.
She's very fluffy. She's a nurse. She's my nurse, Nurse Joni.